doing this.
Well, absolutely. Let me start by saying I really appreciate you joining us today on behalf of the Bay Area Houston Economic Partnership membership, our board of directors, the Clear Lake Chamber of Commerce, and the League City Chamber of Commerce. We really appreciate you taking time doing this for us today. And I was just talking to our members and telling them about our healthcare community and what a wonderful job they've been doing and staying on top of this. I've talked to Todd over each day and Stephen Jones to make sure and keep updated exactly what's happening. So I really want to thank them for all their great work. What I'm going to do, Senator, is just kind of lay an outline out and let everybody on the call know. We've got a little over 200 people on the call. Let them know exactly how this meeting is going to go. Then I'm going to turn it over to you for a few comments, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, so basically, attendees, you can't speak on this, but you can, if you've got questions, you can write those questions down and send them in to us. You hit the button on the bottom right hand of your screen. Later, toward the end, we got Tim Jeffcoat, the Houston District Director for the SBA. We'll field some questions at the end of this meeting. Any unanswered questions that we cannot get to today, either Senator Cornyn's staff will respond to those questions or BAHEP will respond to those questions. It's going to go like this. I'm going to turn this over to Senator Cornyn here in a few minutes. Then we're going to have a question and answer period. And then we're going to have live question and answer with the SBA specialist, Tim Jeffcoat, who's an expert at this and has been doing this for quite some time. And Jimmy, if you don't mind, make sure that you keep us on schedule. The senator has got to be off the call here in about 30 minutes. So with it, Senator, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take charge.
Well, Bob, thanks to all of you for, let me make sure. Okay, now I'm unmuted. I appreciate my friends at the Bay Area, the Houston Economic Partnership, for organizing this call, and always enjoy working with Bob Mitchell and the rest of the team. But my goal is to provide you some additional information about resources that are available to you in response to the coronavirus. And I'm glad Tim Jeffcoat is on the line too, because he may be, and the SBA may be, the most popular folks in town now, given the $350 billion that we're trying to push out to small businesses to help them stay afloat during this very difficult time. And I'm sure he'll be able to answer some specific questions. So far, Congress has passed 3 pieces of legislation, the latest of which is the Bipartisan CARES Act, which was signed into law at the end of March and already brought more than $47 million in recovery grants to the Houston area. But to Bob's point, we know this is both a public health crisis and an economic crisis, unlike any we've experienced before. If you told me a couple months ago that I'd end up voting for $2.2 trillion in spending in a single bill, and that vote would be unanimous in the Senate, I wouldn't have believed it. But this is something that has called on all of us to appeal to the better angels of our nature and called all of us to rally on behalf of our state and country. So let's talk about healthcare. Obviously, that's the first concern. We know a lot of hospitals are concerned about capacity, and so they're foregoing elective surgery in order to have available beds and ventilators and staff in order to deal with this crisis. So they have their bills to pay as well. And they need, of course, protective masks, gloves, and other PPE. And so we pushed $100 billion out the door. I think Seema Verma said the initial tranche of about $30 billion will be going shortly, and then the rest will be going in due course. And there's some flexibility on how that money is spent, but the idea is to keep the capacity there as we do our job through social distancing and individual hygiene, trying to bend that curve down, and then make sure that the hospitals and the professionals are available there to take care of those who need that help and can't convalesce at home. But we also know that the key to dealing with this is going to be ultimately developing drugs that can treat this COVID-19, and that's why there's numerous clinical trials currently underway to try to come up with an effective and safe treatment. But then obviously vaccine is the goal. but that's going to be probably toward fall, maybe at the earliest. So once we have done everything we know to do to sort of defeat the virus, what do we need to do in the meantime? Well, that means a lifeline to individuals and businesses that through no fault of their own are out of work. And we know that there are people who work by the hour and for tips, particularly in the hospitality industry and others that have been shut down. Restaurants, the dining rooms are closed, and they're trying to get by on takeout and deliveries. But in the meantime, the people that work in those places are not receiving a paycheck. And so the federal government is sending a direct payment to your bank account if you file the 2019 tax return. They have obviously all the contact information. The goal is to send that into a direct deposit account up to $1,200 a person, $2,400 a married couple, up to a family of four, that makes up to $150,000 can receive up to $3,400. And this is designed to tide people over, to bridge them over to the next step, which may well be unemployment insurance. We have vastly expanded the eligibility to include both nonprofits and independent contractors in this gig economy we have. And we've also extended it by a period of 13 weeks and expanded the benefit by adding an additional $600 a week in federal unemployment benefits on top of the state's portion. So we need to give people the money they need to cover their expenses, to pay for their food, to pay their rent until the smoke clears. But the other thing we need to do is make sure the jobs are still going to be there for them when we beat this virus and when the economy starts coming back. And that's why we established, through SBA certified lenders, the Paycheck Protection Program. It's initially funded with $350 billion. It's designed to provide a strong incentive for employers, if they can, and not everybody can, but if they can, to maintain their payroll and to help pay their rent and overhead. If they do that through June, then what initially start out as low interest loans at 1% interest, that can then be forgiven. That's a powerful incentive. They can borrow, I believe it's up to 250% of that figure, and it can translate into an outright grant if they're able to work to keep their payroll intact until June. This is done not through the traditional infrastructure, but through lenders, local lenders, banks, credit unions that are certified by the Small Business Administration. The initial application was released last Tuesday, and starting last Friday, 6 days ago, lenders started receiving applications. And I know you can only imagine in something this big, and it is this, we've tried to get money out the door so fast, there are going to be challenges, and there have been challenges because of the overwhelming number of applications is one. This is also a completely new system, and so there's a big learning curve for all of us. But I'd encourage anybody who is eligible to apply sooner rather than later. You may be familiar with the fact that the Treasury was so concerned about our ability to sustain this fund that Senator McConnell went to the floor of the Senate today and asked for unanimous consent to add another $250 billion on top of it. Again, these are unprecedented times, but we need to meet the challenge. And unfortunately, it was blocked, and there's hopefully going to be some negotiation take place. For myself, I really felt like we should have replenished those funds in this, what is obviously very popular program. But we ought to also wait and see how this, the rest of all this spending, this unprecedented spending, is going to work. We know there have got to be gaps, there are going to be unintended consequences, and we want to learn from that and make sure we get the money to the people who need it the most as fast as we can, and not waste any money if we can help it. But you know, many of y'all know Jay and Jay Guerrero and Ben Daly on my team there in Houston, and I would encourage you to reach out to them if there's other things we can do to help. I know you have other speakers to get to, so let me stop there. But before I do, the Federal Reserve announced another lending facility that they are standing up to basically end up loaning out close to $500 billion. They're hoping to lever that up, and that's going to have a huge boost in terms of liquidity for companies that, again, through no fault of their own, are finding difficulty with cash flow. And so for those who have collateral that can secure those loans and pay them back on reasonable terms over the next couple of years, that's another effort to try to help those large employers and large businesses stay as healthy as possible during very difficult times. So Bob, I'll kick it back to you, and I'm happy to answer and dodge a couple of questions as the case may be.
Senator, you never dodge questions. I know you better than that. So, hey, listen, let me share with everybody. I just got a text message while you were talking, Senator, from Joan McKinney, my wife, over at Norman Frady Chevrolet. And this is great news. She goes, so excited. We got our loan number and we'll get the money on Monday. That's good news.
That's great.
That is great news, okay? Well, you mentioned something a few minutes ago when you said nonprofit. Of course, you caught my ear on that one. And, Senator, one of the concerns that we have, the 501c6s were not eligible for the PPP and or the EIDL loan program. Now, I will tell you this, that as recently as 1 o'clock today, I got a phone call that said that 501c6s are eligible for the EIDL loan. And right. It's so confusing. If you tell me that, I believe you, but I've heard it both ways. So what can we do maybe as we move forward on the PPP? Is there any chance of the 501c6 is getting eligible for that?
Yeah, well, if you won't believe me, maybe you'll believe Tim. But I think the EIDL loans are good to go and an option. But there was some negotiations around the nonprofits. We understand, the goal is to keep people employed, and people employed with nonprofits should be part of the goal. But because nonprofits can also include not just 501c3s, but also sports teams and other maybe more challenging to explain employers, it was narrowed to the 501c3. But I've heard enough feedback from people like you, Chambers of Commerce and others, that we need to take a closer look at that and see if we might be able to expand that, because our goal is to allow nonprofits to keep their employees on the payroll too.
Absolutely. And it's pretty serious for organizations like mine and Clear Lake Chamber of Commerce. It's a tough situation. Let me get to the second question. Congress has passed 3 coronavirus relief laws to stop the spread of COVID-19 and help businesses stay afloat. But we know no bill is perfect. What would you like to see in the next coronavirus relief package?
Well, there's been some discussion. One of the most popular things of Congress to do is to spend money, but at some point, this emergency passes, we're going to have to figure a way to pay it back and to deal with the deficits and debt, which is not very popular in Washington these days. But, my attitude is when you're in a war, you got to defer some of those other discussions till after the shooting stops. And so that's where we are right now. But there have been ideas like an infrastructure bill. I'm game. We should have done an infrastructure bill already. The biggest challenge is how to pay for it. And if people think, well, we just add this to emergency spending to deficits and debt, I think that's a serious proposition. And I think we need to look at a way to provide a pay for that portion. But the idea is of getting people back to work. Infrastructure will do that. Do we need it? Yes, we do. But I want to make sure that it's not just ideologically driven, and it actually cuts across, let's say, our oil and gas sector with pipelines. We know our ports are important. Obviously, the Port of Houston is critical. And so we need to, if we're going to look at infrastructure, we ought to look at it across the board. And I'm game. But what I really want to do is make sure that all the money we pushed out the door so far is working the way we intended. And the gaps, like the the nonprofit issue you and I just discussed, that we have an opportunity to fix some of those holes before we go on and do other things. Because we know that when Congress decides to flip a switch, that doesn't necessarily mean people on the ground or the intended recipient gets the benefit that we just voted for it. And we need to make sure that we follow through.
Well, I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you to do this for me, but I'd sure like you to be thinking through this process, and that is that we consider the coastal spine and the storm surge suppression system is part of that infrastructure bill. Again, not to put you on the spot, but just kind of keep that in the back of your mind if you don't, if you will.
No, but that's an important project. I agree.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so next question. The EIDL program includes an availability of $10,000 advance. Is that something that is currently available to businesses that apply for the loan? If not, what is the time for the advance?
Hey, Bob, if you allow me, can I defer to Tim on that? I think, let me defer to Tim on that, if I may.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll be happy to take that, Senator. And thank you, by the way, for telling everybody so much about our programs. You made my job very easy today. So the question was, are EIDL advances available now? Was that basically the question?
Yes.
Yes, they absolutely are. Yeah, they absolutely are.
Can you do both, Tim?
Yes, you can. It is entirely possible, and I would say that in many cases for businesses, it makes sense to pursue both the economic injury disaster loan, since it is for a much longer period of time and covers operating costs, as well as the PPP, because its emphasis is going to be on payroll costs.
Thank you for bailing me out, Tim.
You're welcome.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Okay, next question. Senator, you mentioned that the legislation passed by the Congress last week includes direct financial assistance for Texas families. Can you talk more about who qualifies for a check and how soon Texans can expect to receive the money?
Yeah, when we passed the bill and it signed into law, I guess a week ago Friday, the Secretary Mnuchin said his goal was to get the money to people within 2 to 3 weeks. And we've seen a week go by. And now I think the most recent update is the middle of the, what that would be in another week. That's their goal. I hope they hit the target, but I can tell you that Secretary Mnuchin and the folks at Treasury are pretty hard working, but we've given them a lot to do, and they're doing the best they can. But that's the target.
You know, Senator, I'd like to say this is what's happening today is something that's never happened before. And while there's been some kinks in the system, there's been some issues. It's unbelievable. I'm just shocked that it's been able to advance as quickly as it has. So kudos to everybody that's working this. I know they're busting their tail, and yes, there's going to be some issues, but the speed that you guys have pulled this off to me is just, it's incredible. So
great.
All right, next question. The administration has stated that additional unemployment funds will be made available to the states. What is the timeline of this rollout to the state level?
Well, if you've seen, the Texas Workforce Commission is absolutely being crushed by applications just because so many people are out of business. So you can see, if you can see a method to our madness here, part of it is try to encourage employers to keep people on payroll. And that's not going to be possible for all of them. So people will apply for unemployment insurance, and we want to make sure they have a benefit that will cover the need, again, with another so-called safety net there, and an enhanced benefit of $600 per week. We don't want to pay people for not working or better than they would get if they did work. So we don't want a disincentive there at all. But by extending it for another 13 weeks, applying it to 501c3 nonprofits and to independent contractors and gig workers, hopefully we'll catch a good chunk of people. But I know the governor, I've talked to the governor about this. I know they've got a call out for all hands on deck to answer the phones and fill out the applications or respond to the applications. So again, I think they're doing the best they can. It's going to take a little longer than it might ordinarily take, but I just encourage people to be as diligent and but also as patient as they can.
Thanks, Senator. And I think this is probably the toughest question that I'm going to ask you, and that is, on top of the harmful economic effects of the coronavirus outbreak, Houston is suffering with low oil prices.
Right.
What can we do to boost the energy sector during this downturn?
Well, I've been involved in a number of conversations, including one at the White House last Friday, where we had a number of industry executives, and the president and Senator Cruz and I were there along with some of our colleagues. This, as you know, is kind of multi-headed beast that we're fighting. One is just the increased production, which is a great thing for our country. We're exporting more oil and natural gas. Unfortunately, the demand, because of this coronavirus in the world economy, has dropped off dramatically. So we got a lot of oil and gas. We got to put it somewhere. And so the Secretary of Energy and we are working together to try to get that put in the strategic oil reserve. Obviously, for the government's perspective, buying oil at this price is a good deal. And from a producer perspective, they need to have some place to get it out and for it to be stored, because otherwise they got nowhere for it to go. But this is, as I said, a multi-headed beast, because one of the biggest problems, sort of insult to injury, I would call it, is when the Saudis and the Russians decided to glut the international markets, and without regard to what its impact would be on the United States. Saudi Arabia, as you know, depends on the United States for its security in large part, in a very dangerous part of the world. And we had more than one meeting and phone conversation with the ambassador. We wrote a letter to the Crown Prince and said, if you're depending on us to vote for support for the U.S.-Saudi alliance when it comes to our common interest, you need to think twice about what you're doing here, because allies don't treat each other this way. Well, what I saw just a little earlier today, apparently there has been at least some reported agreement among Russia and Saudis to cut back on production. But I know it's a tough situation for folks in the energy sector, and I know Houston's the energy capital of the world, and so it's being felt very acutely there. But we're doing everything we know how to do, and if anybody has some other suggestions, we're open for business.
Thanks, Senator. And another tough question. What would you say is a tipping point where the balance between slowing the spread and the economic pressures will be that the country has to reopen for business and lift the stay-at-home orders?
Well, that's a $64,000 question. We all want to know that, because we can't afford to do what we need to do if we don't have the economy strong and growing. And while this is a temporary measure, public safety measure to shut down large parts of our economy, we need to find a way to gradually get back to work. And part of the successful efforts we've made to mitigate the spread has been because of things now that we are all doing almost routinely, which is washing our hands and maintaining social distancing. If you notice, this virus loves a crowd, and congested parts of the country, places like New York, of course, hardest hit, New Orleans because of Mardi Gras and the like. And so there are many things we can do, I think, to learn to live with in this environment and buy time for those clinical trials for treatment and a vaccine to come online. So I can't give you a hard date, but I can tell you that President Trump, he wanted to open churches by Easter, by Sunday. That's not likely to happen, but we're all anxious to get back to work. The truth is, there are things we do on a daily basis that involve risk, like driving your car and, living your life. So this presents really, like we said, an unprecedented challenge for us. But at some point, after we've addressed this potential for exponential growth cases and overwhelming of our healthcare system, once we've dealt with that by flattening the curve, I can tell you that I and you and everybody else is thinking about how do we gradually work our way out of this. And so I don't have a date for you, but certainly that is a high priority.
Well, Senator, I think we got about 5 more minutes here. Let me ask the last question that I have on my list. And it comes from TJ Alls, our friend at I-45 Now. And his question is, what is being done at a federal level today to fund research at institutions such as UTMB, which has already recorded a few breakthroughs in the battle versus COVID-19?
Well, I've talked with some of the leadership there at UTMB, and they're doing great work, just like they did with Ebola, and they did with the Zika, the mosquito-borne virus, and they are really a jewel. And there are other institutions in the Houston area that are our great medical center, great researchers, our academic and scientific institutions. We have pushed a lot of money into that research to try to expedite both these clinical trials for cures and vaccines. So I don't think it's for lack of money that we are where we are. We just started from a standing stop to running a full sprint, and we are in a race against this virus. But I was on a phone conference a little bit earlier with some of our great researchers, and they are on the game and they are working hard, and they're going to help lead us out of this current crisis. This isn't the last, or I should say the first pandemic or epidemic that we've had to deal with. But this is, I think, going to be part of our new normal and how we adapt to this. But one of the things this teaches us too, Bob, is we're going to have to change the way we do business with regard to our supply chains in China on medical equipment and on pharmaceutical drugs. And we're going to have to somehow get them to shut down some of these markets, which are unfortunately connected with some of the transmission of the virus from animals to humans. And then they spread around the world as people travel and do business in China. So a lot of lessons to be learned, but we'll do what we've always done, Hurricane Harvey being the most recent thing. And after a disaster, we figure out how to help each other and pull together. And we'll do that again.
You know, Senator, you speak about Harvey, but as long as I've been in this job, to me, this is the toughest one I've been through. Harvey, cancellation of the Constellation, the retirement of the shuttle. I mean, those you can kind of see light at some end of the tunnel. At this one, in this situation, you just don't know when it's going to end. So it's been a real struggle for me personally, having to deal with this.
Well, I think the uncertainty is driving us all a little bit to distraction. But hopefully, we're seeing numbers on a day-by-day basis that look more optimistic, more hopeful, and I'm confident we'll work our way out of this.
Well, Senator, thank you for your time. Thanks for all your work. We really appreciate it. Thanks for taking care of it.
Appreciate it, Bob. Thanks a lot. Take care.
All right. Okay, Jimmy, let's go ahead and get Tim Jeffcoat on now, and let's let Tim kind of give us some details as to what's going on with the SBA, and then I think there's some questions that he's prepared to answer as well.
Yeah, great. Hi, Tim. Yeah, so I thought I'd kick it off with a couple of things here, maybe a softball question for you. So I heard earlier today, as Bob just said, we aren't strangers to some of these disasters. On the Harita call this morning, you made a good point about existing SBA loans that I thought was good information that folks in this call would probably want to hear. Could you talk a little bit about SBA efforts to help out with existing disaster loans that folks may already have?
Yeah, sure can. Not only disaster loans, but what we would call business loans. So the 7As and 504s and micro loans, if you're familiar with those terms. So the lenders in the Houston area do guaranteed loans from the SBA on a regular basis. Every year we do over $1 billion of that here in the Houston area. So for any business that currently has a SBA micro loan or 504 loan, those can be deferred for up to 6 months. If you have one of those, just contact your lender and they should take care of you. If you have an existing disaster loan, so if your business got one from Harvey, then that has automatically been deferred by the SBA until December 31, 2020. You don't have to do anything, that has already occurred. And for a business that might currently have an SBA 7A loan, that's the most popular business loan that is underwritten, or rather guaranteed by the SBA here in the Houston area, at around 90% of what we do. We are making those payments for you for the next 6 months, and that began on March 27th. So as long as your 7A loan was, as we say, in a regular servicing status, so it was in good shape, then we will be making those payments for you for the next 6 months.
That's great. Another topic that has been on the minds, and I just want to remind everybody that you can still submit questions for Tim here in our Q&A feed, and we'll try to work our way through all of them. If you had a question for the senator or the senator's staff, we'll be getting back to folks on some of those, because I know that we just didn't have time to answer questions live during that. So I wanted to point that out. But some of the topics that have come up that, again, you addressed earlier, is that people are going to different SBA lenders and hearing different information about the availability of loans. Could you maybe speak a little bit about who is able to loan, make these loans, and who may not be able to?
Sure, absolutely. So in the Houston area, which is defined as Harris County and the 31 counties around it, in the Houston area, there are about 190 lenders that work with the SBA. All of those lenders are capable of processing these loans, these PPP loans. The CARES Act doesn't prescribe that they must do the loans, and it doesn't tell them with whom they must do the loans. But there are a bunch of lenders doing it. There are lots and lots of activity with the PPP loan going on in the Houston area. So what some people are saying is they've talked to their lender of choice, whoever that may be, and that lender has said that they're capped out, or they don't have any money left, or something of that nature. You know, I don't know what verbiage they're using, but I can assure you that the $350 billion for PPP is not consumed. There is definitely still money there. In fact, I'm looking at some recent numbers. As of today, only about 130 billion has been approved. So just doing the math quickly for a music major like me, that's $220 billion left over, no problem. So if you've talked to your banker and for whatever reason they aren't capable of doing that loan for you now, I would encourage you to go to my website in Houston. On there, I've got a list of lenders, and that lender list will include ones that have told us they are willing to take brand new customers, those with whom they do not have an existing banking relationship. So you can go to that website, find that list, and there is a column for will they take new customers, and that should help you out. Give you that website address real quickly. Hope you got your pencil handy. www.sba.gov/tx/Houston. When you look down the page, it's in the middle called Business Resources, and a little section called Corona COVID Resources.
Tim, can I backtrack just a little bit? The question I have, and I know there's several people on the call right now that they're in the same situation that I'm in, and that is an organization like myself that has never applied for any kind of an SBA loan at all. And my terminology now is the idle loan. Okay, we submitted a request on the 4th at 6:45 for a loan, not knowing what we were doing. We didn't ask for money. We had to fill out the form. Since the 501c6s are eligible now, what do we do? Do we just sit back and wait for the SBA to contact us? How does that work?
Sure. So you're talking about for the economic injury disaster loan.
Correct.
Just to clarify. Yeah. Yes. And in fact, I know what that notice looks like because I've seen a bunch of them. So yes, you will get a notice that comes from the SBA. I'm popping one up in front of me, and it basically says, "Dear applicant, we have your stuff," in short, and then gives you some various information about the PPP program in case that would also be of use to you. And it also explains that the advance is calculated as $1,000 per employee up to a maximum of $10,000. So if you had 5 employees, and that means you would be eligible for a $5,000 advance. But yes, you are getting that. I understand that there is an immense flood of them going out as we speak and over the next 24 hours. So if you haven't seen anything yet, from what I am reading right this minute, and this came in to me at 2:46 p.m., so not too long before this call, that you should see quite a lot of activity here in the next 24 hours.
Okay, so Tim, what we did receive that as soon as we hit send it, they sent back and said they acknowledged that and they were registered, so to speak. I guess what the part of it I'm specifically not talking about the $10,000. I'm talking about the actual loan itself, the loan that you can, the 30-year loan. Do we wait for them to contact us?
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. So what's happening right now is a disaster loan analyst will be looking at your information from the time you submit under the context of a normal disaster, as if there is such a thing. From the time you submit that, within 5 days, a disaster analyst should have contacted you and said, I've got your stuff, I'm working on it. And they may ask for some follow-up information or some clarification. Then once 30 days have elapsed from the time of your application, we should have been in touch with you to tell you what we think the appropriate amount is, the duration, so that we can get that money into your hands, with the goal being that within 30 days, the loan is done and we are ready to disperse immediately to you $25,000, and then the remaining money for the loan will come shortly thereafter, depending on the specifics for your business, whatever the needs of your business are.
All right, Tim, thank you. Okay, Jimmy, go ahead.
So we're having some questions from the group about the SBA issuing guidance to lenders. Is that something that's already taken place, or is that something that is in the process?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So there was a guidance issued to lenders. There's actually been several, but the main guidance are what we call our IFRN, was issued very quickly after the act was signed. And it's a 31-page document that goes out to our SBA lenders to explain how to do this. When we issue a guidance like that, and we do this all the time, part of what we do is guarantee loans. So we're constantly working with lenders about these kinds of things. So when we issue a guidance, we know that guidance is going to cover some significant majority of the cases, but there's always going to be idiosyncrasies for individual businesses that just might not be covered in there. So there's a couple of things that augment that. One very important one is we quickly set up a dedicated 800 number just for our lenders, so that when they have those unusual situations, they can call that number and they will get a subject matter expert that works for the SBA that can address those questions for them. The other thing is, in many cases, some of these peculiarities have already been dealt with in our standard operating procedure that we use for all 7A lending. So a PPP is really another flavor of a 7A loan. So sometimes we're able to say, just simply refer to the SOP, and that has the answer, and the experienced SBA lenders know how to do that. The ones that are less experienced, now that could be a different issue. So for my district, when the COVID crisis started and when the act was being signed into law, we were being contacted by lots of lenders that have not done loans in several years, but they have signed agreements with the SBA to do them. So we got them reactivated. And then there were a number of lenders that said, we want to become SBA lenders. So what that does is that presents an opportunity for sure to meet the needs of small businesses, but it also presents a challenge in that they have to learn how to be SBA guaranteed lenders quickly. So that's occurring too. So I could see where we might issue a guidance to one of those newer lenders or the ones that have been dormant, and it may take them a little while to digest that and turn that into an operating practice at their bank. But yes, to answer your question, we have absolutely provided the guidance and a help desk to make sure that the lenders get the assistance they need. And then here in my office, I have 5 people, and all they do is work with our lenders in order to service them.
Okay, so they do have the guidance they need to distribute funds or disperse funds both through.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking at it as we speak.
Tim, can you walk us through? We have a lot of questions about timeline. Can you kind of walk us through what the process is from when people go into the bank to apply for the loan or fill out their loan application to the time they get actual funds that they can use? What does the timeline look on that?
That's a good question. So what we are doing with this PPP program, this will teach you way more than you want to know about SBA guaranteed lending. But this is designated as what's called a delegated process. So what that means is we tell the banks, you may use your own processes, your own internal forms, and et cetera. You don't have to do it in some rigid way that the SBA tells you to do it. So what that also means is that it can vary from bank to bank as to how they approach this. So it's difficult to answer what a typical timeline would be. It really depends on which lender you work with. The majority of lenders, if you go talk to them, to one of our normal 7A products, such as what's called the SBA Express, that is a completely delegated product. That bank is able to take your information, use their existing forms. If they are happy with what it says, just to summarize and kind of simplify, they turn to the SBA computer system and say, I've got somebody here, we're happy with them. We tell them the loan number, and that means the loan is done at that point in time as far as we are concerned. That can be quite a quick process that can happen in just a few days. So I can't give you a finite description or answer, but I thought it would be good to just kind of give you that process. So if you
Hey, Tim, Jimmy, let me say this. I was talking about Joan sending me a text, just a few minutes ago. Joan submitted her loan on Monday. She just got notified while we were on the phone that she received the loan and the money should be in her hands on this coming Monday. Now, that sounds pretty unusual to me, and that's fast, okay? But that was her situation. Now, every situation is going to be a little bit different, but in her situation, it's going to be 7 days and the money's going to be in her hand. So,
thanks for sharing that, Bob. That sounds a lot like what I would call the express lending paradigm when these types of loans happen in Houston. Now, PPP has never happened. That's new to the world. But this general approach, they're generally quite fast. She's probably working with one of our more experienced, more capable lenders that does a lot of these and has good processes. If on the other hand, she was working with one of the newer lenders, it may take an extra day or two, but that sounds very realistic to me.
go ahead, Jimmy. Tim, can you hear me?
Yeah, I sure can.
Jimmy, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm getting very choppy reception right now. I apologize for that. It sounds to me like there's some standard guidelines issued, but a lot of this is going to vary by the bank's own policies. So that it sounds like it's difficult to really nail this down. Let's see, what else do we have here? Tim, is there anything else you think that people need to know about this program? It looks like, okay, here's one. On the EIDL program, will people applying for loans be notified with a number, or how are they going to reach out to each company?
Yeah, very quickly after you apply, from what I'm told from people that apply for EIDL, it's very quickly after you click submit, you will get an email from the SBA that confirms they received your information, and it will have an application number with it. It'll also tell you a little bit more about other programs available to help you out. So yes, that does happen quickly.
It happens very quickly. In our case, it probably happened within 30 seconds. And then yesterday, you can go back into the system and kind of see where you're at in the system by using that number.
Okay, great. Well, Tim, it looks like that's all the questions that we have for now. I really appreciate your time this afternoon, talking with us and letting us know the ins and outs of this process. There's a lot of information going around, and some misinformation going around, and it's great that you're able to take your time and clarify some of this for our members. So yeah, thanks again. I know you probably have a lot of places that you need to be. I know that I've been on at least 2 calls with you already today, so I really appreciate it.
You are very welcome. Happy to help, and we hope everybody does well.
Tim, I want to say thank you as well. I want to say thank you to Senator Cornyn and Jay Guerrero for helping us pull this off today. And I also want to thank all of our listeners, all the people that are playing a part in this. We really appreciate it. It really helps us get all the good word out. And you see a healthcare worker, say thank you to them. And with that, I think that we're going to close it down. And Jimmy, I'll let you be the official person that shuts it down.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody that was able to attend. I hope that you got some good information. Please, if you haven't gotten your question answered, I'll forward the rest of these questions that are in our queue over to Senator Cornyn's office, and we will be sure to try and get all of your questions answered to the best of our abilities. Thank you all for showing up and participating. And if you have any questions later on, email me. I'll be happy to pass them along or answer them the best that I can. My email, of course, is jimmy@bayareahouston.com. Thank you all.